So seed oils clearly are higher in polyunsaturated fats. There's more double bonds. They're more prone to oxidation, as I mentioned. And this is the main reason, and one of the big reasons, in my opinion, that you're going to want to avoid industrial seed oils is for this reason that they oxidate very easily. So if you prefer not to inject them, for example, MCT might be for you. So most guys on TRT obsess over things like dosage, frequency of injection, the type of ester they take. But here's the deal, is not many people are talking about what the hormone is actually swimming in. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to pull back the curtain, open up a conversation about something that I have not heard anybody touch on that can change things like comfort, consistency, and even like long-term results with your testosterone optimization therapy. And this topic is the carrier oil that the testosterone sits in. So really, for me, it's a question about seed oils versus MCT oil. So the typical seed oils that you're going to see are things like grapeseed oil, cottonseed oil, and sesame oil. And MCT oil is a medium chain triglyceride oil, usually from things like palm or coconut oil. So my name is Dr. Ryan Hewitt, and this is the Weaponized Body Podcast. And as usual, I'm here to cut through some of the noise when it comes to things that move the needle with your health, performance, recovery. And today I want to talk exclusively about testosterone replacement therapy or testosterone optimization therapy. So if you're someone who is on this type of therapy, or you're thinking about it, or just want to know more about it, I'm here to help shed some light on something that, once again, I have not heard a large discussion about, but I want to open up the conversation. So I'm going to cover things like cost and access, possible downsides, things that people should consider when they're switching oils, and some of the things that nobody talks about. So I want to preface this with this show being not medical advice. So this is about education. I want you guys to work with your own clinician. And what I'll do is I'll reference some studies in the show notes that you can check out, approach your clinicians with, see what they have to say about it. So let's talk about what this carrier oil actually does. A lot of people have heard that, testosterone cypionate. Well, what the fuck does that mean, right? Testosterone enthanate. So whether you're taking cypionate or enthanate, which are the two most popular, what are called esters of testosterone when it comes to replacement therapy, it's dissolved in an oil vehicle. Okay, it has to be delivered in this oil. And what happens is when you inject this oil into your muscle, it forms what's called a depot. And it's either in the muscle or in subcutaneous tissue, depending on how you're administering it. And what happens there is that ester of testosterone is then cleaved, and your body absorbs it slowly over time, over the course of days, depending on the type of ester that you take. So here's the things that really matter for me when I'm working with guys in their testosterone therapy is how it feels, right? So the speed of the draw, right? The injection, is it painful? Is it fine? Do you have soreness, lumps? And then also how it releases, right? So the characteristics of the depot, right? So which, basically how you're measuring this is through how you feel, how you look, how you perform, because this can influence the amount of testosterone and the frequency of testosterone that you inject to try to get you to that optimum level. So in the United States, the commercial testosterone is typically what's called cypionate. It's the one that is the most tolerated, and it has a nice slow gradual absorption rate. And it's commonly in a medium of cottonseed oil. You're going to see this a lot. Either grapeseed or cottonseed oil is what I see the most. And usually there is also a stabilizer, if you didn't know, that is needed for these oils so the testosterone doesn't crystallize in the oil. And an alcohol is typically used, benzyl alcohol. sometimes benzyl benzoate. They're two different solvents that are used. They're preservatives. And what the reason, again, that they use these preservatives or solvents is so the testosterone doesn't crystallize in the medium. So, when it's injected, it's readily absorbable and easier to inject. The testosterone enthanate is it's usually delivered in something called sesame seed oil, which is, again, a thicker oil. So check your package inserts. Whenever you get, testosterone delivered from a pharmacy, there are package inserts. I encourage everybody to check those out. Read those inserts. There's some interesting things on there that will tell you about the carrier oil, the type of medium that it's in, also any of the stabilizers that are in there. So what about MCT oil? I don't hear a lot of people talking about this, but medium chain triglyceride oil is, from coconut or palm kernel. And the thing about MCT oil is it's thinner, so there's lower viscosity. So you're going to see mostly MCT-based testosterone from compounding pharmacies. You're rarely going to see these from, commercial type of pharmacies. So in other words, if you're getting your testosterone prescribed by a doctor covered by your insurance, it's going to be very difficult for you to get this medium because this medium is, it's not as cheap and it's not as readily and widely available. So most of the time you're paying for this, if you're paying, through, a testosterone clinic, then this can be available to you. And the reason you should care is that, like, the viscosity of the oil, it actually influences the injection comfort and also the type of needle gauge that you can use. So smaller the needle, usually the more comfortable. And if you're using a small needle to draw the testosterone, you'll be able to do this more easily with an oil that has lower viscosity versus like a thicker oil. It's going to take forever to draw it in a really small needle. So the depot that is delivered into subcutaneously or intramuscularly from the actual injection can feel, smoother, and it can, and again, the oil that it's delivered in can, the way it influences how the testosterone is delivered to your body. So the absorption rate. So in other words, it can affect the absorption rate as well. So again, that matters for your tolerance for, if you have allergies to any sort of seed oils, irritation to the skin, is there lumps, and the stability of the compound, how quickly it absorbs. So these are things that you'll want to consider, right? So if we put, let's say, MCT oil and seed oils head to head. So I'll talk about a couple of points that I wanted to touch on here. So number one, we'll get to the viscosity and the injection feel first. So seed oils like cottonseed oil or grapeseed oil, those are thicker oils, okay, comparatively to the MCT. So often that means you have to use a bigger gauge needle to draw the testosterone, and also to deliver it too, right? It's more difficult to deliver with a very small gauge needle. So you have to put more pressure into the tissue when you're actually injecting. So some people have gotten post-injection soreness, small lumps, whereas MCT oil, medium chain triglyceride oil, is thinner. So it's easier to draw into the syringe. It's also a smoother push. So it's delivered to subcutaneously or into the tissue much easier. So it's often more tolerable with smaller needles. There's generally less site irritation as well. So a lot of guys that want to switch to, say, for example, subcutaneous injections, this one is definitely a must, in my opinion. So it's going to be much more comfortable and easier to deliver subcutaneous. My preference is intramuscular. You're going to get the best results intramuscular, followed by subcutaneous. So let's talk about the depot, right, or the release behavior of one versus the other. So thicker oils can form what's called a slower depot, whereas the thinner oils like MCT, they disperse more rapidly. So in other words, you may absorb actually the testosterone quicker with the MCT versus, say, the cottonseed, grapeseed oil. So it can tweak the early part of the curve of how fast you absorb the testosterone. So they're not different drugs. They're both testosterone cypionate, for example. it's not a new ester. In other words, they're both cypionate. They're just a different vehicle. And this can actually change how it's released over the course of a few days, for example. There has been some trials that have compared these pharmacokinetics, but they're pretty limited. So this is in the camp of like it's probable or plausible, but it's not a scientific, concrete, evidential statement. So, but most people have noticed that the testosterone does absorb quicker with the MCT oil. So what you may want to do with that is more frequent injections, smaller doses over the course of days versus the thicker oils you do perhaps less frequently, but also, dispersed throughout the week. Let's talk about stability and oxidation. So, and this is a big one for people that believe that seed oils are bad for your health. So this podcast is not going to be about should you eat seed oils or not. For myself, I have been a proponent of minimizing seed oils for a long time. Foods that are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, and we're not talking like naturally occurring omega-6 fatty acids, which by the way, polyunsaturated fats are omega-3s, are omega-9s, or omega-6s. But foods that are rich in omega-6, for example, like seed oils, processed foods are typically rich in what are called omega-6 fatty acids. Processed foods rich in these oils tend to be more easily oxidated or rancidified. In other words, they spoil a lot easier. And what you can do is you can actually measure this in your blood. You can measure this in your tissue. I am a firm believer and understand that you are what you eat, and you are what you eat eats too, which is why a lot of people talk about eating, say, for example, grass-fed meat, because the meat tends to be higher in omega-3 fatty acid versus omega-6. If the cows are eating, a diet of more natural forage, which is grass, versus corn and soy and that bullshit. So your body, it takes in these fatty acids and it brings them into your tissues and into all your cells. Every single cell in your body is made of what's called a phospholipid bilayer. So all your cells have fatty acids in them. And when you have more omega-6s, they can oxidate easier than, say, omega-3 fatty acids, which are more liquid at room temperature than omega-6s. So overall, just like commonsensically, logistically, and scientifically, I'm not a big fan of processed foods, but I'm not a fan of processed foods that are rich in omega-6, especially. So I try to avoid these. Now, is cottonseed, grapeseed oils, are those processed oils? Yes, they're processed food. They're processed oils, right? So if you're somebody who's trying to minimize processed omega-6 rich oils, you may be in favor of wanting to do medium chain triglyceride or MCT oils. Okay, so seed oils clearly are higher in polyunsaturated fats. There's more double bonds. They're more prone to oxidation, as I mentioned. And this is the main reason, and one of the big reasons, in my opinion, that you're going to want to avoid industrial seed oils is for this reason that they oxidate very easily. So if you prefer not to inject them, for example, MCT might be for you. So if you're chasing, let's say, marginal improvements because the amount or in the dose of medium chain triglyceride versus polyunsaturated fats you're injecting is pretty small. But if you're already clean, you're pretty clean, and you're trying to minimize the amount of omega-6s that you're intaking, again, MCT is probably the more chemically stable option for you. So allergies and sensitivities. So people, there are people out there that are allergic to cottonseed and grapeseed oil. So if you've had like itching, rashes, like site reactions, it could be the carrier oil causing those, not the testosterone. So MCT oil, could be something that you'd want to try. Now, touching on the preservatives, here's something nobody talks about. There is, in your testosterone vial, there is testosterone cypionate. Cypionate just refers to like the fatty acid that's attached to the testosterone that makes it absorbable in oil. You have the oil carrier, right? Grapeseed, cottonseed, MCT, whatever it is. And then you also have something called a preservative. The preservative is what keeps it liquid at room temp, for example, so it doesn't crystallize the testosterone. So you're going to see stabilizers called benzyl alcohol. That's the most common, and sometimes benzoate. Okay, both improve the solubility, like I said, but they can be irritants for some people. They can, it could be a sting or an irritant. Again, not necessarily the testosterone itself, but it could be the preservative. So don't overlook that. Let's see. So here's the thing: the availability. The availability is far and wide more the cottonseed and grapeseed varieties of testosterone cypionate. It's the most FDA approved testosterone, right? Using seed oils. The MCT versions are usually from compounding pharmacies, and that's basically like the practical line you'll run into when you're getting your testosterone from, let's say, a prescribed MD. For example, you're going to have a hard time getting it from traditional commercial pharmacies versus compounding pharmacies. So, this is one of the things that I offer with Weaponized Wellness. So this is one thing that I'm a huge proponent of, is making sure that you're looking at things like the results in the blood work due to the frequency, the dosage, and the type of testosterone you're taking. And then also having the MCT version available for men and women. And this has been a big game changer. I've had, some guys that are asking for this. They're like, hey, I want the MCT oil, and I'm able to get that for my clients, right? So we're able to, have these pharmacies available that have the MCT varieties for them. So if, you grab standard cypionate or enthanate at a retail, or with insurance, you're almost certainly getting like cottonseed or sesame seed, right? And if it's cheaper, it's more readily available. But if you want MCT oil, expect to get it from a compounding pharmacy. You're going to need to, work with a clinician who's working independently. So there's occasionally a higher out-of-pocket cost. Insurance typically won't cover it. You got to look at the lead times and fulfillment as well from the pharmacies, because some pharmacies, it's a far less product in demand, so it's harder to get. And also you'll want, clarity on the solvents that are used too. These are some things you can ask your clinician. If you are someone who's getting testosterone optimization therapy, these are good questions, right? What is the carrier oil? Is there options if I don't like this carrier oil? What are the lead times and fulfillment if I want this? What are the solvents used, etc.? So let's talk about some of the risks that are rarely discussed, some of the issues. Injection site irritation, we touched on a little bit. So the thicker oils, like the seed oils, can cause more soreness, more site soreness and nodules. Again, this has a lot to do with technique as well. Needle length, gauge, etc. But the oil itself can play a role for some people. The preservatives, right? We talked about the benzyl alcohol concentrations. Sometimes when they adjust the oil volume, you could have a reaction to that. So it's worth comparing the NDCs, for example, in the box with the inserts. So there's drug data on there you can check out. So if you switch carriers, you'll notice like a different feel potentially too, like from an MCT to, cottonseed or grapeseed. Because again, the cottonseed grapeseed is typically a slower release of testosterone versus the MCT. So you'll want to, make sure you're experimenting and working with your clinician on frequency and dosage. Needle gauge and route as well. So MCT often allows a smaller needle gauge. So it plays nicer with people that want the subcutaneous options as well, which many guys feel they're more convenient, less painful. I'm not as big of a fan as I am the intramuscular, but certainly an option. Way better than, say, like a gel or a cream or a troche. Definitely far better with injection because you can control the dosage and the frequency much easier. So, if you're someone who hates intramuscular, this could be your lane, asking for the MCT oil variety for subcutaneous, right? So the reason you'd want to consider switching to MCT oil is, number one, your sensitivity. Okay, the itchiness, the rashes, the irritations, the lumps. If you're experiencing that, it doesn't necessarily mean it's your technique. It could mean that you have sensitivity to the oil. And what I found is that for those who they're having problems with administering the testosterone, like the compliance is going to go away. It's not going to be very good, right? So people delay shots, they don't adhere, it kills their outcome, and then they say, "Oh, this didn't work for me." It's like, well, no, you just didn't give it. You didn't follow the protocol. So if you like subcutaneous shots, smaller needles, MC2 definitely better option for this. Optimizing, which I'm a big fan of, right? So you've eliminated seed oils from your life, from your kitchen, but you're still injecting in yourself. It doesn't make any sense. So if you want like low oxidation, stable inputs in all of your inputs, then MCT oil aligns with this philosophy. This is why I switched over to it as well. If you're getting lumps, right? If you're getting, let's say you're getting a lot of peaks and valleys with your testosterone. I guess the way you feel, right? So switching carriers could be a reason, right? So obviously you want to look at and talk to your clinician about the frequency and the dosing, but also the carrier oil can influence that too. So, MCT oil lines up with more frequent microdosing, which I'm becoming far more a fan of than one big bolus, one big dose a week. If you're going to do that, definitely do it in like a seed oil carrier. But I'm seeing blood work clean up nicely with the more frequent lower doses. So things you want to be careful of course, are things like increases in hemoglobin and hematocrit, also extra aromatizing to estrogen. So you want to keep your estrogen in check. You want to keep your RBCs in check. You want to keep your cholesterol in check. You want to keep your blood pressure in check. This is like I had Dr. O'Connor on one of my episodes early. He calls it the ABCDs, right? You want to keep your blood sugar in check. You want to keep your cholesterol in check. You want to keep your blood pressure in check. You want to keep any deposition issues in check, like your RBCs, your ferritin. You got to make sure you're checking all this stuff, you guys. So this stuff isn't without consequence. You got to be doing this intelligently and working with a practitioner who knows what they're doing. So, look, most guys do great with the cypionate, with the cottonseed, enthanate, and sesame seed, stuff like that. It's widely available. It's readily affordable. Guys are doing this every day with painless injections. And if your labs are stable, you look great, you feel great, there's no reason to switch and fix it. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if you're someone who's struggling with the results, you're not getting the results you were hoping for, or over time you've started to notice a dip in your energy or your libido or your recovery, then maybe it's time you get a deeper look under the hood. This is something that I help guys with, right? So, make sure you're pulling your labs with consistent timing, right? You want to make sure that, you're consistent with your dosages, and you want to make sure you're getting routine lab work, and so you're comparing apples to apples, right? So, obviously you want to make sure you're paying attention to what's going on with your lifestyle, with your routine, with the 5 levers, right? Eating enough protein, lifting weights, sleeping properly, managing your stress, drinking enough water. So, if you're thriving on the standard seed oil testosterone, great, keep that going. So, but if you're fighting every injection, you're sensitive to the oil, you want cleaner blood chemistry, talk to your doc about an MCT oil based compound. So it's not an ideology, right? It's, something that's there, that's easier, I think, to administrate and execute for easier injections. And that's what we do here. That's what I do is I help people, with small wins, small victories, just continue to push progress with what they're doing to improve their performance, their health, their recovery. So listen, if this episode was helpful, if this was something you got some value from, give us 5 stars, give me 5-star rating, review, and share this with a buddy who is on testosterone therapy. See if, they're talking to their doc about this stuff. And, by all means, if you have questions for me, if you ever want me to check out your blood chem, you want to do a deeper dive evaluation under the hood, feel free to shoot me a DM. The Weaponized Dad on Instagram, Dr. Ryan Hewitt on Facebook, and Dr. Ryan at theweaponizedbody.com is my email. And I'm always looking for feedback and also things that you guys want to know more about. So, I love talking about this stuff, and I appreciate any and all of you that listen. I will see you guys next week.